There exists a precise moment in each of our lives when something inside our chest breaks irreparably. Perhaps it was that betrayal you never expected, those words that someone you loved said to destroy you, or maybe that public humiliation that made you question your own worth. You remember that moment, don't you? That instant when the world seemed to collapse and you felt you would never be the same again. Physical pain has an end, but there exists a much deeper pain, one that is engraved on the soul like a permanent mark, making you walk through life always afraid of the next blow. It is this sensation of being always vulnerable, always expecting the next stab, always anticipating the next disappointment that consumes you from within. Franz Kafka knew this pain intimately and discovered something revolutionary about it. Something that can completely transform your relationship with suffering and finally free you from this invisible prison of constant fear. If you have made it this far, I know it was not by chance. You are seeking something that goes beyond superficial advice or empty motivational phrases. You want to deeply understand how it is possible to shield yourself against suffering without closing yourself off to life. That is why I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because here we explore the deepest truths about the human experience in a way you will not find anywhere else. This is not just another spirituality channel. It is a safe space where people like you, who have already been through a lot, find genuine understanding and real tools for transformation. Each video is created thinking of you who are suffering now, you who need true answers, not false optimism. And if this content is making sense to you, leave a like to help me reach more people who, like you, deserve to find that inner peace that seems so distant. Franz Kafka lived his existence as a perpetually wounded man, carrying within himself a sensitivity so acute that every human interaction became a potential source of torment. He knew intimately that sensation of walking through the world as if made of glass, where any misplaced word, any contemptuous look, any gesture of rejection had the power to completely shatter his inner peace. But it was precisely this extreme vulnerability that led him to an extraordinary discovery about the nature of human suffering. Kafka realized that the pain we feel does not necessarily come from the event itself, but from our relationship with that event, from how we position ourselves before it, from what meaning we attribute to it in our personal narrative. Imagine for a moment an ancient castle, imposing and mysterious, erected on top of an inaccessible mountain. You can observe it from afar, admire its architecture, try to decipher its secrets, but you can never actually reach it. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you plan different routes, there is always something that prevents your arrival. This castle represents our constant search for emotional security through external control. We spend our entire lives trying to build walls around us, trying to control the actions of others, trying to predict and avoid all possible sources of pain. But just as Kafka's protagonist never manages to enter the castle, we never manage to completely control the world around us. And it is precisely in this impossible attempt at control that our greatest source of suffering resides. True transformation, according to the Kafkaesque perspective, does not happen when we manage to avoid pain, but when we completely change our relationship with it. It is as if we discovered that the castle we so wanted to reach actually already existed within us all along. Kafka suggested that there exists an inner fortress, an unshakable core of our essence that remains untouched, regardless of what happens in the external world. It is not about becoming insensitive or closed off to life, but about discovering this deeper layer of who you really are, this part of you that observes everything that happens without being destroyed by it. Think of those people you know who seem to have a natural serenity, an inner peace that does not depend on external circumstances. They are not different from you in essence. They have simply discovered how to access this inner fortress. They have learned that there is a fundamental difference between feeling pain and completely identifying with it. When someone hurts them, they feel, recognize, process, but do not allow that experience to define who they are. It is as if there were a silent observer within them that witnesses everything but remains at peace. And you, have you ever gone through that moment when you felt that your entire identity was being attacked because of someone else's words or actions? When someone rejected or criticized you, and you felt as if your value as a human being had been questioned? If you are living this now, if you feel that every social interaction is a minefield where you can be hurt at any moment, leave in the comments the phrase, "I am ready to discover my inner fortress." Your courage in sharing this could be exactly what another person going through the same pain needs to see today, to not feel so alone on this journey. Kafka understood that we live in a kind of existential labyrinth, where each corridor we choose can lead us both to liberation and to new dead ends. The difference lies in how we navigate through this labyrinth. Most people spend their lives trying to map all the corridors, trying to predict where the dangers are, spending immense energy on avoidance strategies. But Kafka proposed something radically different. Instead of trying to control the labyrinth, how about transforming our way of walking through it? How about developing a way of being present in each corridor, at each corner, without fear of what may come? This inner transformation that Kafka describes is not a linear or simple process. It is more like a slow and sometimes painful metamorphosis, similar to what he portrays in his works. Imagine a caterpillar that needs to completely dissolve inside the cocoon before emerging as a butterfly. During this dissolution process, it is no longer a caterpillar, but not yet a butterfly. There exists a moment of total vulnerability, of not knowing who one is. This is exactly what happens when we begin to question our identification with suffering. There exists a period of discomfort, of not knowing how to react to situations in the same way as always. But it is precisely in this moment of vulnerability that true strength begins to emerge. Kafka discovered that when we stop resisting the uncertainty of human existence, when we accept that life is inherently impermanent and unpredictable, something extraordinary happens. We begin to develop an inner flexibility, a capacity to adapt to circumstances without being broken by them. It is like learning to dance with the storm instead of trying to build ever larger shelters against it. This dance with impermanence teaches us a fundamental lesson. Our true security does not come from having guarantees about others' behavior or future events. Our security comes from trusting in our infinite capacity to deal with anything life brings us. It is a subtle but revolutionary change in the way of thinking. Instead of asking ourselves how we can avoid being hurt, we begin to ask ourselves how we can develop our capacity to heal quickly, to learn from each experience, to become wiser and more compassionate through each challenge. Kafka observed that we often create our own prisons, trying to avoid larger prisons. We build walls so high around us that we end up isolating ourselves, not only from pain, but also from joy, from genuine connection, from the possibility of loving and being loved deeply. It is as if we chose to live in a small and safe cell to avoid the risks of the world outside, without realizing that true freedom lies in developing the courage to leave the cell knowing that we have everything we need within us to deal with any situation. The Kafkaesque perspective invites us to question our most basic assumptions about vulnerability and strength. Perhaps our vulnerability is not our weakness, but our greatest source of power. Perhaps it is precisely our capacity to feel deeply, to connect authentically, to love without guarantees that makes us truly human. When we accept our vulnerability as an integral part of who we are, we stop fighting against it and begin to use it as a compass to live more authentically. There is a profound difference between being vulnerable and being victimized. Vulnerability is a conscious choice to remain open to life, even knowing that this implies risks. Victimization is when we allow others' actions to determine our emotional state and our perception of ourselves. Kafka shows us that it is possible to maintain vulnerability while developing an inner invulnerability, a stable center that is not shaken by external storms. Think of a centennial tree that has survived countless storms. Its roots are deep, its trunk is flexible enough to bend without breaking, its branches know when to yield to the wind and when to resist. It does not avoid storms, it has learned to dance with them. In the same way, when we develop this inner fortress, we no longer need to avoid difficult people, challenging situations, complicated conversations. We know we have sufficient internal resources to deal with anything that arises. This transformation does not mean you will stop feeling pain. It means that pain will stop controlling you. You will continue to feel when someone disappoints you, when a relationship ends, when a project does not work out. But these experiences will become information instead of definitions of who you are. It is as if you developed a thicker emotional skin, not because you became insensitive, but because you learned to process experiences in a healthier way. Kafka understood that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to what is. We spend enormous energy fighting against reality, wishing things were different, that people were different, that the world were different. But when we accept that impermanence and unpredictability are fundamental characteristics of existence, we begin to flow with life instead of fighting against it. It is like learning to swim instead of trying to walk underwater. This acceptance is not passivity or resignation. It is a much more intelligent way of using our energy. Instead of wasting it on useless resistance, we direct our resources to what we can actually control: our thoughts, our reactions, our choices, our inner growth. It is a paradigm shift that transforms us from victims of circumstances into conscious creators of our experience. Kafkaesque wisdom teaches us that there is a difference between reacting and responding. When we react, we are like marionettes being controlled by others' actions. Someone pulls a string, and we dance. Someone says something cruel, and we plummet. Someone ignores us, and we become invisible. But when we learn to respond, we create a sacred space between the stimulus and our action. In this space resides our freedom, our dignity, our personal power. Imagine that each person who crosses your path is like a mirror. Some show distorted reflections, others show only a part of who you are. Some try to convince you that you are smaller than you really are. But when you know your own face, when you have clarity about your own essence, these mirrors lose the power to confuse you. You can look at them with curiosity, learn what they have to teach, but never allow them to define your self-image. Kafka discovered that our true fortress does not come from trying to control how others see or treat us. It comes from developing such a solid relationship with ourselves that others' opinions, while they may interest us, can never devastate us. It's like having an inner house so well built, so cozy, so full of light, that no matter what storm is happening outside, you know you have a safe place to retreat. This inner house is built brick by brick, through each small conscious choice we make. Each time we choose self-compassion instead of self-criticism, we are laying a brick. Each time we choose to see a difficult situation as an opportunity for growth instead of a confirmation of our inadequacy, we are laying another brick. Each time we choose to respond instead of react, we are strengthening the foundations of this house. The process of building this inner fortress is not always linear. There will be days when you feel invincible, completely connected with this inner strength, and other days when a misplaced word still has the power to knock you down. This is completely natural and part of the growth process. Kafka teaches us that perfection is not the goal, awareness is. The goal is not to never feel pain again, but to develop the capacity to feel pain without being destroyed by it. There is an extraordinary freedom in realizing that you do not need everyone's approval to be happy. that you do not need everyone to understand you to have value, that you do not need to avoid all difficult people to have peace. When this realization becomes real in your life, not just an intellectual understanding, you experience a type of emotional independence that is truly transformative. It is as if you discovered you had wings all along and had never tried to fly. This emotional independence does not mean isolation. Actually, it means the opposite. When you no longer need others to fill your emotional voids, when you no longer need constant external validation, you become capable of relating to people in a much more authentic and generous way. You can love without desperate attachment. You can give without expectation of return. You can be present with someone without trying to change them to meet your needs. Kafka shows us that true compassion, both for ourselves and for others, arises when we understand that we are all navigating this existential labyrinth in the best way we know how. Each person who hurts you is dealing with their own unhealed wounds. This does not justify destructive behavior, but offers a perspective that can free you from the weight of resentment. When you understand this deeply, not out of moral obligation, but out of genuine comprehension, something within you is liberated. This liberation doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual process of shedding, like a snake that changes its skin. You will notice that certain situations that once devastated you now only bother you, that certain people who once had total power over your mood are now just background noise in your consciousness, that certain painful memories that once defined you are now just stories that are part of your journey, but do not determine your destiny. The Kafkaesque perspective teaches us that there is a fundamental difference between scarring and healing. When we merely scar, we create a protective layer over the wound, but it remains sensitive underneath. Any touch on that place still hurts. But when we truly heal, the wound transforms into wisdom, into strength, into compassion. What was once a source of pain becomes a source of personal power. This deep healing happens when we stop avoiding our wounds and begin to converse with them. When we understand that each pain we feel has something to teach us about ourselves, about life, about how we relate to the world. Kafka invites us to see our most difficult experiences not as punishments or evidence of our inadequacy, but as rigorous teachers who came to teach us lessons we would not learn any other way. Imagine if you could go back in time and speak to the version of you who was going through your most difficult moment. What would you say to that person? Probably something like, "You are stronger than you imagine. This will pass. You will learn important things from this experience. You are not alone." This compassionate voice you would use with your past self is the same voice you can use with yourself now, in the present, facing current challenges. Transformation happens when we begin to become our own best friends instead of our worst critics. When we develop the capacity to comfort ourselves, to encourage ourselves, to forgive ourselves in the same way we would do with someone we love deeply. Kafka understood that much of our suffering comes from the inner war we wage against ourselves, from the internal critical voice that is much crueler to us than any external person could ever be. When you develop this inner fortress, something magical happens in your relationships. You stop attracting people who take advantage of your vulnerability because your energy changes completely. You emanate a quiet confidence, an inner peace that naturally repels those who seek victims and attracts those who value authentic connections. It is as if you changed vibrational frequency and automatically aligned yourself with people who are on a similar frequency. This change is not something you need to force or fake. It is a natural consequence of the inner work you do. When you truly value yourself, you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone. When you truly love yourself, you no longer need to beg for love. When you truly trust yourself, you no longer need constant approval from others. And this is reflected in every interaction you have. Kafka teaches us that true invincibility does not come from being stronger than others, but from being flexible like water. Water can take any shape, can circumvent any obstacle, can be gentle like a breeze or powerful like a tsunami, but never loses its fundamental essence. In the same way, when we develop this inner flexibility, we can adapt to any situation while keeping our integrity intact. This flexibility allows us to respond to situations creatively instead of reactively. When someone tries to provoke us, instead of automatically entering the conflict game, we can choose to respond with humor, with indifference, with compassion, or simply walk away. We have options because we are no longer trapped in automatic reaction patterns. The freedom that Kafka describes is the freedom to choose our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions. It is the freedom to no longer be hostage to others' moods, external circumstances, unpredictable events. It is a freedom that no one can take from us, because it resides entirely within us. And when you finally understand this, not just intellectually but viscerally, you realize that nothing and no one can ever truly hurt you again. Not because you became insensitive or closed off, but because you discovered that you have an inexhaustible source of love, peace, and strength within yourself. You become like that centennial tree that dances with storms because its roots are too deep to be shaken. This is the silent promise that Kafka left for all of us who dare to dive into the depths of our own existence, that on the other side of pain, confusion, fear, there exists a luminous clarity that makes each previous experience not just bearable, but sacred. That each wound can transform into a door to a wiser and more compassionate version of ourselves. And that the castle we so sought outside was, all along, waiting to be discovered in the only place where no one can ever touch us, within ourselves.